The alien blinked its 3 violet eyes and clicked its mandibles nervously. "Human, please, we didn't mean for you to take it so personally." Captain Harris stood silently, gripping a long cylindrical object that looked disturbingly like a flamethrower. Though the red warning lights and faint hum of its power core suggested it was far worse, he tilted his head, his smile cold and calculating. "Personally? Oh no, I'm not offended. You just hired the wrong species for pest control." The room was a sterile white, its walls softly glowing in the artificial light of the starship's environment. A long table separated Harris from 3 representatives of the Galactic Concord, their odd features a mix of insectoid limbs, bioluminescent skin, and floating appendages. They had thought they were clever, outsourcing a dirty job to a species eager to prove its worth in the wider galactic community. Unfortunately for them, they called humans. "Explain to me again," Harris said, his voice steady, "how you accidentally released a species that multiplies by consuming entire biospheres." The Concord's lead representative, a being known as Zarlthil, twitched his antenna in embarrassment. "It was meant to be a simple experiment in biogenesis. We didn't anticipate the replicator worms adapting so quickly." "They adapted?" Harris interrupted. "You dropped self-replicating monsters onto your colony worlds, and they adapted? I've seen cockroaches adapt. What you've got out there is something worse." Zarl gestured with his lower limbs, a sign of Concordian contrition. "That's why we came to your kind. Humans have shown extraordinary efficiency in managing planetary ecosystems." "Managing?" Harris let out a low chuckle. "Let me make something clear. You didn't hire humans to manage anything. You hired us to eradicate it." The other representatives exchanged uneasy glances. The third, a floating gelatinous sphere with faintly pulsing lights in its core, finally spoke. "Captain, we hope you will understand the need for moderation. Many of these planets are vital to our network of trade routes." Harris walked over to the corner of the room, where a holographic projection of the affected star systems flickered. Bright red zones marked the spread of the worm infestation. His finger traced the map, pausing on the outer edges of the Concord's territory. "And how many systems have been lost so far?" Zarl hesitated. 17. "But there is still hope." "No," Harris cut him off. "Hope's the first casualty when you're up against something like this. You're not dealing with a pest problem. This is an extinction event waiting to happen." "Your proposal, then?" Zarl asked, his voice wary. Harris slung the flamethrower-like weapon over his shoulder and crossed his arms. "Simple. We don't try to contain them. We don't study them. We don't send in teams with net guns and pheromone traps. We burn everything they've touched. And then we burn the ashes." The gelatinous sphere flickered a sickly yellow, which Harris had come to recognize as a sign of discomfort. "Surely you jest. You mean to destroy entire planets." "Not the planets," Harris replied, "just the parts that are already compromised, which, by my calculations, is roughly all of them." Zarl recoiled, his antenna stiffening. "Unacceptable. Billions of credits worth of infrastructure." "Don't talk to me about credits," Harris snapped. "Those worms don't care about your infrastructure. They'll chew through starships, cities, farms, everything. You can't bribe biology. You can only outsmart it or outgun it. I recommend the latter." The room fell silent. Harris could hear the faint hum of the ventilation system as the Concordians processed his words. Finally, Zarl spoke, his tone cautious. "And if we refuse your extreme methods?" Harris shrugged. "Then I head back to Earth and tell them the Galactic Concord doesn't take human expertise seriously. You can try hiring someone else. Maybe the Florin with their fancy pheromone dispersers, or the Ventari and their containment drones. Let's see how they do when the worms reach their homeworlds." The gelatinous sphere flickered red, a clear sign of panic. "Captain, please. This is not a decision we take lightly." "Neither do I," Harris said. "But your options are limited. Either we stop this now, Or we all sit back and watch the galaxy turn into worm food. Zar leaned forward, his mandibles clicking in frustration. You humans are always so final in your solutions. That's because we've seen what happens when you're not, Harris replied. You think this is the first time humans have had to deal with something like this? Back home, we had invasive species that nearly wiped out entire ecosystems. Rats, kudzu vines, zebra mussels, you name it. You know how we solved those problems? We didn't ask them nicely to leave. We fought them until there was nothing left to fight. And your weapon? Zarl asked, glancing at the device on Harris's back. Harris tapped the cylinder, a small smile playing on his lips. We call it a thermal disperser. Think of it as a flamethrower, but for entire landscapes. Once we've cleared a planet, this beauty sterilizes the surface down to the molecular level. Nothing survives. Nothing, the gelatinous sphere asked, its voice tinged with alarm. Nothing, Harris confirmed. It's the only way to be sure. Zarl stood, his mandibles twitching in indecision. This is a dangerous precedent, Captain. If we authorize such a method... You didn't call me because you wanted a safe solution, Harris interrupted. You called me because you're out of options. The Concordians fell silent again, their collective unease palpable despite their alien physiology. Harris waited, his arms crossed, as they huddled together in whispered discussion. He didn't bother trying to eavesdrop. Their languages were too complex, their tones too alien for him to understand without a translator. Finally, Zarlthil turned back to him. Very well, Captain. You have our authorization. But understand this. If your actions lead to unforeseen consequences, the Concord will hold humanity accountable. Harris grinned, his teeth gleaming in the artificial light. Don't worry about consequences. By the time I'm done, there won't be anything left to worry about. The drop ship glided through the void, leaving the charred surface of Arena's prime behind. Captain Harris leaned back in his seat, his fingers drumming against the armrest as he stared out of the viewport. The stars stretched endlessly, a stark contrast to the chaos they had just left behind. Around him, his crew worked diligently, running diagnostics, repairing equipment, and cataloging the data they had collected. Despite their exhaustion, there was a quiet determination in their movements, a shared understanding of the stakes. Harris didn't need to say it aloud. They all knew the job was far from done. Next target, Ruiz asked, his voice breaking the silence. He was standing beside Harris, holding a tablet displaying their mission itinerary. Harris glanced at the screen. Doral V, he said. Another agricultural world, but this one's got a higher population density. We'll need to be extra careful with the evac zones. Ruiz frowned. If there's anyone left to evacuate. Let's not assume the worst, Harris replied, though his tone suggested he wasn't optimistic. Prep the team. We hit Doral V in 6 hours. Everyone gets 2 hours of rack time before the briefing. As Ruiz moved to relay the orders, Harris allowed himself a moment of reflection. This mission wasn't just about saving worlds. It was about proving humanity's value to the galaxy. The Concord might view them as a last resort, a species of blunt instruments to be wielded only in dire circumstances. But Harris didn't care about their opinions. What mattered was results. He reached for his communicator and activated a secure channel. Command, this is Captain Harris, reporting successful sterilization of Arena's Prime. Preparing to engage next target. Requesting resupply at designated coordinates. The reply came swiftly, the voice of Admiral Greaves steady and reassuring. Acknowledged, Captain. Supplies are en route. Good work out there. The Council's watching closely. Harris smirked. They always are. As the channel closed, Harris stood and stretched, his joints protesting the long hours in the cramped drop ship. He moved toward the rear of the craft, where the crew had begun a makeshift triage of their gear. Ruiz was inspecting the disperser's plasma core, while others were patching up armor and recalibrating targeting systems. Any issues I need to know about? Harris asked. Ruiz shook his head. Dispersers holding up fine. Turrets took some damage, but they'll hold for another deployment. Drones are recharging. We're good to go. Good, Harris said. Because something tells me Doral V is going to be worse. Ruiz grimaced but didn't argue. They both knew the pattern. Each world they visited was more infested, more dangerous than the last. The replicator worms were learning, adapting to their tactics. The only question was whether humanity could stay one step ahead. Captain, a voice called from the cockpit. It was the pilot. We've got a message coming in from the Concorde. Put it through, Harris said, moving toward the console. A holographic image of Zarl materialized, his mandibles twitching nervously. Captain Harris, he began, his tone uneasy. We received reports of increased worm activity along the outer colonies. It appears their spread is accelerating. Tell me something I don't know, Harris replied, crossing his arms. Zarl hesitated. There is another matter. Some of our scientists believe the worms are responding to your sterilization efforts. They've begun altering their reproductive cycles, producing spores at a faster rate. Harris's jaw tightened. So, you're telling me the infestation is evolving to counter us? Yes, Zarl admitted. And there is more. We have detected what appears to be a central hive mind, coordinating their actions across multiple systems. If this is true, it could explain their rapid adaptation. Harris exhaled slowly, processing the information. A hive mind would complicate things, but it also presented an opportunity. Destroy the head, and the body would follow. Send me everything you have on this hive mind, Harris said. Locations, activity reports, anything. If we can pinpoint its position, we might be able to end this infestation for good. Understood, Zarl replied. But Captain, I must warn you. The Council is growing uneasy with your methods. There are concerns about the long-term consequences of such widespread destruction. Harris's eyes narrowed. If the Council wants to complain, they can send someone else to clean up their mess. Until then, I'm doing what needs to be done. Zarl didn't respond immediately, his antennae twitching in silent frustration. Finally, he said, Very well. I will relay your request to the Council. Good luck, Captain. The hologram flickered out, leaving Harris alone with his thoughts. He turned back to the crew, who were watching him expectantly. You heard the bug, Harris said. The worms are getting smarter. We need to get smarter, too. Prep for Doral V, and keep your guard up. This fight's just getting started. The crew nodded, their resolve unshaken. Harris returned to his seat, staring out at the stars once more. The galaxy was vast, and the infestation was spreading, but he wasn't about to back down. Humanity had faced extinction before, and they had always survived. This time would be no different. As the dropship hurtled toward its next target, Harris tightened his grip on the disperser slung across his back. The replicator worms thought they were unstoppable, but they hadn't reckoned with humanity's stubbornness, ingenuity, and sheer will to survive. The galaxy had pests, and Captain Harris was going to make sure they were eradicated, no matter the cost.